So many times in sports, we talk about and call players GOATs, coaches GOATs, or the greatest of all time. And over the last decade, I think that we've been in a situation where when we talk about the GOATs or the greatest of all time, whether it be Drew Brees, whether it be Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, whoever you believe is the best of all time from a football perspective, or regardless if it's baseball, if you think Barry Bonds or whoever it may be in baseball, or if you think Michael is the GOAT or LeBron is the GOAT, we always have the conversation and call people GOATs, the greatest of all time. And in the last decade, what has happened here has been that kind of word and verbiage has kind of gone by the wayside a little bit because we use it so much. We use the word GOAT. We use the greatest of all time so much that sometimes it gets diluted. But then you have a situation like today with Tyrann Mathieu announcing his retirement from the New Orleans Saints. And a guy at LSU and for the local community may have had the biggest impact of them all. Tyrann Mathieu at LSU will be a living legend, and he should be. To me, Tyrann Mathieu is the best LSU defender of all time in my lifetime, and I could make the argument and would humbly make the argument that he's the greatest of all time. Tyrann Mathieu in 2 seasons had 133 tackles at LSU with 6 sacks. He had 4 interceptions with 16 passes broken up. He had 8 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries for a touchdown, 11 forced fumbles, 2 punt returns for a touchdown, 2 fumble recoveries for a touchdown. And in 2011 and in 2010, I remember there being situations where even with people that I knew that was on the team, they would tell me, Blake, we think that Tyrann Mathieu might be the best player on the team. I remember the summer of 2010 when seeing a friend like Brandon Taylor, your former number 18, and him coming back home, a guy that I went to school with and admired dearly, and him telling me like, hey, man, there's this dude named Tyrann Mathieu out of St. Aug who is a playmaker. And then in 2011, when LSU made the run to the national championship, Tyrann Mathieu was the face of that program for everything that he did. I remember games with Tyrann Mathieu even as a freshman, like the diving interception versus Texas A&M in the bowl game, the forced fumble and fumble recovery against A&M in that bowl game, and then going into 2011, when you go into talking season like what we are in right now, there being so many people saying, well, hey, Tyrann Mathieu is taking over number 7. Is he going to be in the next lineage of Patrick Peterson? And what really started the DBU run and the verbiage of DBU. No one called themselves DBU until LSU made it cool. And then Tyrann Mathieu would go into the 2011 season and what should have been and probably should have been the Heisman Trophy winner. For me, I have watched, and I know a lot of you that are watching this show currently, you have watched a lot of LSU sports and a lot of LSU football. And to me, outside of guys like Jaden Daniels and Joe Burrow, I don't know if anybody has made a bigger impact during a season for LSU ever. Tyrann Mathieu is the best LSU defender of all time in my lifetime. And for me, I think he's the best LSU defender of all time. Guys, we've never seen someone like Tyrann Mathieu grace us in college football and do the things that he did, like what he did in 2011. He was an offensive playmaker playing defense. The ball continuously found number 7, whether he was forcing fumbles, whether he was picking up fumbles and running them in for touchdowns, whether it be the electric punt returns like he had against Arkansas that tied the game, or whether it was the SEC championship game in 2011 versus Georgia when LSU was down 10 and then he scores that epic or has that epic score, and then the game is flipped and LSU would go on to win another SEC championship. It was beautiful. I look at a guy like Tyrann Mathieu and the impact that he had in college sports, and I see him announcing his retirement today in what was a long lineage of elite football by number 7. Guys, make no mistake about it. Tyrann Mathieu, to me, is the best LSU defender of all time. And there have been some greats. I think of Patrick Peterson. I think of Glenn Dorsey. I think of all the big names that have come through that building and are greats, LSU legends. But I don't know if any of them can come close to what Tyrann Mathieu did in 2011. Now, you could fast forward to what happened to Tyrann at the end of his LSU career in 2012 and talk about the suspension. But I think Tyrann Mathieu, and even Tyrann Mathieu himself, has said, going through that adversity and going through that situation, and Patrick Peterson going to the Cardinals and saying, I will mold him. I will take him under my wing. You don't have to worry. And a guy for the next decade plus would be an example to every Louisiana player that wants to grow up and grew up wanting to be like number 7. I think of situations, too, that come to mind for me of him donating over $1 million and giving it back to LSU, and that's why his name and his face and his picture is on the wall. Guys, he's an all-time great. He's an all-time LSU legend. Now, 2 times in this opening segment, I've said I think he's the best LSU defender in my lifetime. No, I think he's the best LSU defender ever. I think he might be the best LSU, one of the best LSU players ever. You know, I think of Joe Burrow. I think of Jaden Daniels. I think of Malik Neighbors. I think of Brian Thomas. I think of Joe Burrow. I think of Justin Jefferson. I think of Jamar Chase. And I look at Tyrann Mathieu and I say, guys, he might be in the top 2 or 3, and he might not even be 2 or 3 to some. The favorite for most LSU people is always going to be number 7. The lasting legacy that he will leave here and what he will do. And guys, his life isn't over. I'm talking about him, I guess, in some sense, like his life is over, because it's not. Guys, he's 30-something years old. And there's no telling what his impact can now, since he's retired, be for Louisiana State University. But all of the great instances where number 7 on the field and what he did for us will go down in infamy. It will go down in legacy. It will never be erased. Today, I shared a short clip of Tyrann Mathieu's best highlights, and some of them that we already have gone through. I think of the Arkansas punt return. I think of the Georgia punt return. The guys, I don't know if I've ever seen someone stop and start on a dime better than Tyrann Mathieu. Maybe Reggie Bush would be the only other person. I think of Tyrann Mathieu as a freshman coming off the edge against Mississippi State on 3rd down and getting a sack and forcing another fumble. I think about the interception versus Florida in the back of the end zone to seal a massive win for you against a top 25 opponent. Probably even stealing that interception from Brandon Taylor. I think of all the electric stuff that he did that, guys, has not been replicated. You know, this past year, there was a Heisman given to a guy by the name of Travis Hunter. And I'm not saying that Travis Hunter was not worthy of the Heisman that he received, because he was. But, guys, the last time an LSU defender won a Heisman was this past year, a guy that played on both sides of the ball. Nobody has had the impact defensively in a game-in, game-out scenario more than Tyrann Mathieu as a defender. You know, I think of you being down 6-3 against Oregon in what might have been the most epic opener of all time. Number 3 versus number 4. And you being down 6-3 and you stalling on yet another Les Miles offensive drive And then a forced fumble is created by Tyrann Mathieu, and he picks it up and he scores. Game was over. Teams and people and players going away from number 7 because they were like, listen, man, he might not be the biggest. He might not be the strongest. He might not be the fastest, but he's the best player on the field at every given moment when he steps on it. Tyrann Mathieu retired from the New Orleans Saints today, and the only thing that I can say is thank you. And I believe that you're the best LSU defender of all time. Tyrann Mathieu made LSU cool. He embodied what LSU in Louisiana was. He made a stand in saying, all I want to do is wear the purple and gold. And he did, and he wore it proudly. To Tyrann Mathieu, the best LSU defender of all time, I hope you have a great retirement. I hope to see you on LSU sidelines yet again. And boy, does LSU analyst Tyrann Mathieu have a really good ring to it. Now, some of you will say, make him the DB's coach. I don't think that will happen. Maybe you can make him a safeties coach. I don't know. If Jake Olson doesn't perform, I don't know. But if I had a very sneaky suspicion, I don't think Tyrann Mathieu's LSU legacy is over. In some regards and in some thoughts, I think it's just beginning.